Water. It is the stuff of life. It's a clear, tasteless, odorless liquid that sustains us, cleanses us, and makes up more than half of who we are. We trust it. We drink it without a second thought. But on the morning of February 19th, 2013, for the guests of the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, that trust was about to be irrevocably shattered. It wasn't a sudden catastrophe, not a burst pipe or a citywide contamination alert. This was something far more insidious, something that crept into their rooms through the plumbing. A quiet and deeply personal violation. It started as a trickle of complaints. A low, almost imperceptible pressure in the taps. A shower that wouldn't quite spray, a toilet that wouldn't quite flush, annoying, but nothing more. Then came the second wave of reports, and these were more alarming. The water, some guests said, had a strange color. A murky brownish-yellow tint that stained the white porcelain of the sinks and tubs. It was followed by a taste. A bizarrely sweet, almost savory flavor that clung to the back of the throat, making a simple glass of water from the tap an unsettling experience. Finally, the odor arrived. A foul, sickly sweet smell that grew stronger with each passing day. For 8 long days, the guests and residents of the Cecil Hotel had been living with this tainted water. They had been bathing in it, brushing their teeth with it. Some, in moments of thirst, had even been drinking it. Management had received the complaints, but the source of the problem remained elusive. The plumbing in a building as old as the Cecil was a labyrinth, a complex network of pipes and valves. The problem seemed localized to certain floors, and then it would spread. Maintenance crews were baffled. On the morning of the 19th, with the complaints reaching a fever pitch, a maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez was dispatched to the one place they had indeed thoroughly checked: the roof. High above the grit and grime of Main Street, the Cecil was crowned with 4 massive cylindrical water cisterns. Each tank stood roughly 10 feet high and 4.5 feet in diameter, holding thousands of gallons of water that supplied the hotel's upper floors. It was a long shot, but they were running out of options. Santiago Lopez ascended to the roof, the sprawling, sun-bleached panorama of Los Angeles unfolding around him. The air was cool. The sky was a hazy blue. It was a routine task on a routine day. He approached the main cistern, the one that supplied the kitchen, the coffee shop, and the guest rooms where the complaints were originating. The tank's hatch, a heavy metal lid, was closed. This was unusual. He expected it might be ajar, perhaps allowing some debris to fall in. He placed his hands on the cold metal and heaved it open. A wave of foul air, thick and putrid, washed over him, forcing him to recoil. He peered into the darkness of the tank, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The water level was lower than it should have been. The surface was unnaturally still, covered in a strange, shimmering film. And that's when he saw it. Floating face up just below the surface was a human form, bloated, discolored, and hauntingly still. The skin was a pale, marbled green-gray. The face was unrecognizable. The source of the water contamination, the cause of the foul taste and the putrid smell, was the decomposing corpse of a young woman. Her name was Elisa Lam, and she had been missing for 19 days. The discovery sent a shockwave of horror through the hotel, then the city, and then the world. How did she get there? How did a 21-year-old tourist end up in a sealed water tank on the locked roof of a hotel? A place no guest should ever be able to access. The discovery of her body was not the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning. It was the horrifying climax to a story that had begun weeks earlier. But it was also the prologue to a modern legend, a digital ghost story that would obsess millions. To understand what happened to Elisa Lam, you have to understand the place where she died. A place with a history so dark, so steeped in tragedy and violence, that some say the building itself is cursed. A place that has become a legend in the annals of true crime, the Cecil Hotel, downtown Los Angeles, the 1920s. A city drunk on ambition, a sun-drenched paradise built on oil, oranges, and the nascent dreams of Hollywood. It was the era of the flapper, the jazz club, the silent film star. In this whirlwind of explosive growth in 1924, the Cecil Hotel was born. Conceived by hotelier William Banks Hanner, it was a magnificent 15-story Beaux-Arts monument to the city's unbridled optimism. For a cost of $1 million, a staggering sum at the time, Hannah erected a palace for the burgeoning business class. Imagine walking into its lobby in those early years. A grand, cavernous space with a floor of polished marble, ornate, gilded fixtures casting a warm glow, stained glass windows throwing kaleidoscopic patterns across the floor, towering potted palm trees reaching towards a ceiling adorned with intricate plasterwork. The Cecil was the height of fashion, a 700-room testament to the promise of Los Angeles. For a fleeting, golden moment, it was exactly that, at a place of luxury and elegance, bustling with travelers and businessmen eager to make their fortunes in the Golden West. But the promise of the 20s was built on a fragile foundation. Just 5 years after the Cecil's grand opening, the stock market crashed and the world economy collapsed. The Great Depression descended like a thick, choking fog over the nation. The glittering promise of Los Angeles began to tarnish. The Cecil's fortunes fell with it. Its intended clientele of well-heeled tourists and executives vanished, unable to afford such luxury. Replaced by the transient, the desperate, the down in their luck, it's the opulent hotel, once a symbol of glamorous dreams, rapidly devolved into a budget lodging, a flophouse, a place for those with nowhere else to go. The gilded dream became a grim reality, and with the desperation came death. The Cecil's dark history, its long and intimate relationship with human tragedy, begins almost immediately. The first documented suicide occurred in 1931. A 46-year-old man named W.K. Norton checked in under the alias James Willies from Chicago. A week after his arrival, he was found dead in his room, having ingested a handful of poison capsules. He was the first in a long, tragic procession of souls, who would choose the Cecil as the final backdrop for their lives. The hotel was beginning to earn a new, more sinister reputation. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, the stories grew more frequent, more grim. The high windows that once offered stunning views of a thriving city now became launching points into oblivion. In September of 1934, Army Sergeant Louis D. Borden, aged 53, was found dead in his room. He had taken a razor to his own throat, leaving behind notes that spoke of his poor health. In 1937, Gracie Magro fell from a 9th-story window. Her fall was broken by telephone wires, but she later died in a hospital. Police were unsure if it was a suicide or an accident. 1938, a Marine fireman named Roy Thompson, who had been staying at the Cecil for several weeks, took a more decisive route. He climbed to the very top of the building, walked to the edge of the roof, and leaped. His body wasn't found on the street below, but on the skylight of a neighboring building. The Cecil was no longer just a hotel. It was becoming a landmark of despair, a suicide hotel, a place people came with the specific intention of ending their lives. But the darkness wasn't confined to self-destruction. It began to fester, to mutate, to attract a different kind of evil. Violence, once turned inward, began to spill outward. In 1944, a story of shocking horror unfolded within the Cecil's walls. A 19-year-old telephone operator named Dorothy Jean Purcell checked into a room with her 38-year-old boyfriend, shoe salesman named Ben Levine. Purcell was apparently unaware that she was pregnant. One night, she awoke with severe stomach pains and went to the bathroom. There alone, she gave birth to a baby boy. In a state of shock and panic, and later claiming she believed the baby was stillborn, she threw the living infant out of the hotel window. The baby's body was found on the roof of an adjacent building. Dorothy Jean Purcell was arrested and charged with murder, but was later found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a psychiatric hospital. The hotel had now become the scene of a horrifying infanticide. But the most infamous tale connected to the Cecil, the one that cemented its place in the pantheon of macabre Los Angeles lore, is that of the Black Dahlia. In January of 1947, the city was gripped by a crime so gruesome, so theatrical, that it has haunted the public imagination for decades. The body of a 22-year-old aspiring actress named Elizabeth Short was found in a vacant lot in Limerick Park. She had been brutally murdered. Her body drained of blood, professionally severed in half at the waist, and a grotesque, clown-like smile carved into her face. The Black Dahlia case, as it became known, remains one of Hollywood's most enduring and disturbing unsolved mysteries. In the days before her horrific death, Elizabeth Short was a lost soul, drifting through the underbelly of Los Angeles. According to crime lore, one of the last places she was seen alive was the bar near the Cecil Hotel. While concrete proof that she was a guest at the hotel is elusive, the legend persists, weaving the Cecil into the very fabric of the city's most notorious crime. The hotel became a character in the story, a shadowy figure lurking in the background of a nightmare. A place where someone like Elizabeth Short might have crossed paths with her killer. As the decades wore on, the Cecil's descent continued, mirroring the decay of the neighborhood around it. Downtown Los Angeles, and specifically the area known as Skid Row, became synonymous with extreme poverty, rampant addiction, and chronic homelessness. The Cecil, situated on the edge of this abyss, became a long-term residence for many of its inhabitants, a place of last resort. Its hallways, once designed for the wealthy, now echoed with the footsteps of the forgotten, the marginalized, the mentally ill. And in this fertile ground of decay and indifference, something truly sinister took root. The hotel seemed to develop a magnetism for the predatory. In the mid-1980s, a palpable shadow of fear fell over Southern California. A terrifying serial killer, dubbed the Night Stalker by the press, was breaking into homes across the region, a phantom who slipped through unlocked windows and screen doors. He was a brutal sadist who raped, murdered, and tortured his victims, men and women, young and old. He left behind a trail of satanic symbols, pentagrams scrawled on walls and on the bodies of his victims. He was a monster who seemed to strike at random, plunging the entire region into a state of panic. That phantom was Richard Ramirez. And for much of his horrific killing spree, his home base, his sanctuary, was a room on the 14th floor of the Cecil Hotel. For just $14 a night, Ramirez could rent a room and exist in perfect anonymity. He would return to the hotel after committing his unspeakable crimes, sometimes covered in the blood of his victims, and no one would bat an eye. In the chaotic, indifferent world of the late-night Cecil, a blood-spattered man walking down the hallway was just another part of the scenery. Ramirez himself would later say that he would walk up the back stairs unnoticed and dispose of his bloody clothes in the hotel dumpster behind the building. The Night Stalker, one of the most vicious and feared killers in American history, found a perfect hiding place in the apathy and decay of the Cecil. The hotel, with its transient population and its culture of looking the other way, provided the perfect cover for a monster. The hotel's grim magnetism didn't end there. As if drawn by the echoes of Ramirez's evil, another serial killer checked in years later. In 1991, an Austrian journalist named Jack Unterweger arrived in Los Angeles, commissioned by a magazine to write about crime and prostitution in the city. He was charming, intelligent, and a celebrated author in his home country. He was also a convicted murderer who had been released from prison, hailed as a model of rehabilitation. It was a lie. Unterweger, it is believed, chose the Cecil as his lodging specifically because Richard Ramirez had stayed there. He was paying a twisted sort of homage to his predecessor. While living at the Cecil, this reformed killer stalked and murdered at least 3 local sex workers. His method was chillingly consistent. He would strangle them with their own bra straps. He was a copycat living in the same den as the killer he admired, drawn to the same well of darkness. The same indifferent walls that had once hidden Richard Ramirez. Suicides, unsolved murders, infanticide, a haven for 2 of the world's most infamous serial killers. Over the years, the Cecil Hotel had accumulated a mythology of death and malevolence that was unparalleled. It was more than just a building. It was a repository of human misery, a silent witness to decades of violence, despair, and predation. Long-term residents would speak of strange occurrences, of an unseen presence in the hallways, of rooms that were inexplicably cold, of a persistent and suffocating feeling of being watched. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, it's undeniable that the sheer weight of the Cecil's past had left an indelible psychic scar on the property. It was a place with a soul, but that soul was deeply, profoundly wounded. And in January of 2013, into this very building, this monument to the dark side of the American dream, walked a young woman from Vancouver, Canada. She was bright, she was curious, she was on a journey of self-discovery. She carried with her a laptop, a camera, and a blog where she poured out her innermost hopes and fears. Her name was Elisa Lam, and she had no idea she was checking into her own tomb. Elisa Lam was born on April 30th, 1991. The daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong who had settled in Burnaby, a sprawling suburb of Vancouver, British Columbia. From the outside, her life seemed ordinary. She was a student at the prestigious University of British Columbia, a bright young woman with her whole life ahead of her. But behind the scenes, her life was anything but ordinary. For years, Elisa had been locked in a quiet, relentless battle with her own mind. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a severe and challenging mental illness characterized by extreme shifts in mood. From the soaring highs of mania to the crushing lows of depression. She also struggled with profound depression itself. This was a fight she chronicled with raw, unflinching, and sometimes startling honesty on her personal blog, which she called Ether Fields. Her blog is a window into her soul, a digital diary that has become a crucial, heartbreaking document in the wake of her death. It reveals a young woman who was fiercely intelligent, deeply introspective, and possessed of a sharp, sardonic wit. She wrote about her love of fashion, posting pictures of stylish outfits she admired. She wrote about her love of literature, quoting authors like Chuck Palahniuk and Dostoevsky. She expressed a deep and abiding yearning for a life less ordinary, for travel, for adventure, for authentic experiences that would push her beyond her comfort zone. But woven throughout these hopeful, creative posts were entries that spoke of a profound and suffocating sadness. She wrote about her relapses, the terrifying feeling of losing control of her own thoughts, the frustration of her medications, which she often felt blunted her emotions and creativity. "It's such a vicious cycle," she once wrote, describing the loop of depression and the side effects of her treatment. She wrote movingly about the agony of loneliness, of feeling like an outsider, of being left behind by her peers. She posted a stark black and white image that simply said, "Depression is a lot of things, but mostly it's being not okay and telling yourself you are." Her words paint a vivid portrait of a person fighting a daily, invisible war, yet desperately clinging to the hope of a better, more stable future. This trip to the west coast of the United States was supposed to be a major step towards that future. She called it her West Coast Tour, a solo journey that she had meticulously planned for herself. It was a declaration of independence, an adventure designed to prove to herself and to the world that she could manage her illness and live the life she dreamed of. She traveled by Amtrak train and intercity buses, documenting her progress on her social media accounts, particularly Tumblr and Instagram. Her journey began in San Diego. Her posts from this time are filled with a sense of excitement and discovery. She posted photos from the world-famous San Diego Zoo, marveling at the animals. She visited the USS Midway Museum. She seemed to be embracing the freedom of being a solo traveler. But even in the midst of her adventure, there were signs of her inner turmoil. On her blog, she reblogged a quote that read, "I am not the same, having seen the moon shine on the other side of the world." She was searching for something, a fundamental transformation, a change of perspective that she hoped this journey would provide. But she also wrote about the acute loneliness that can accompany solo travel. The feeling of being an observer rather than a participant in the lives unfolding around her. On January 26, 2013, her journey brought her to its most famous destination, Los Angeles, the City of Angels. She arrived by bus at Union Station, a magnificent cathedral of travel, and from there, made her way into the concrete canyons of downtown. The destination she had chosen for her stay in this sprawling, iconic city was the Cecil Hotel. Why the Cecil? The exact reason remains one of the case's most debated questions. It was undeniably affordable, and its central location, despite the grit of the neighborhood, made it a convenient base for a tourist wanting to explore the city, in a bid to escape its sordid past. The hotel had also recently tried to rebrand a portion of its building. It had sectioned off several floors and marketed them as Stay on Main, a hipper, more modern, boutique hostel-style accommodation designed to attract a younger, international crowd of backpackers. It's highly probable that Elisa, a budget-conscious student, booked her stay through the Stay on Main portal, completely unaware of the building's true name and its long and violent history, or perhaps she did know. With her interest in the darker aspects of human nature, reflected in some of her literary tastes and writings, perhaps she was drawn to the Cecil's notoriety. Perhaps for her, staying there was part of the adventure, a brush with the city's underbelly. We will likely never know for sure. What we do know is that on that day, Elisa Lam, a young woman filled with a fragile and complicated hope, walked through the doors of a place that had swallowed so many hopes before. Elisa checked into the Cecil on January 26 and was initially assigned to a shared, dormitory-style room on the 5th floor. This was part of the Stay on Main hostel, a room where up to 4 or 5 strangers would sleep in bunk beds. It was a common and economical choice for a solo traveler like her. For 2 days, Elisa shared this space with several other young women. But something went wrong. It's terribly wrong. Her roommates began to complain to hotel management. They reported what they described as odd behavior. According to the hotel's manager, Amy Price, who would later testify in court, Elisa was engaging in unsettling actions. She was allegedly leaving strange, handwritten notes on her roommates' beds. Notes with passive-aggressive messages like "go home" or "go away." She would reportedly lock the door to the room from the inside and then refuse entry to her own roommates, demanding they provide a password before she would let them in. Her behavior was erratic, unpredictable, and frightening enough that after just 2 days of sharing a room with her, her roommates formally requested that she be removed. On January 28th, the hotel management made a decision. They would move Elisa Lam. They relocated her from the shared hostel room on the 5th floor to a private room of her own. She was moved to room 1414 on the 14th floor, the very same floor where Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, had once lived while carrying out his reign of terror. This move is a critical and chilling piece of the puzzle. What exactly happened in that 5th floor room? The complaints from her roommates provide the first concrete evidence that Elisa was in a state of distress. Were her actions a symptom of a severe manic episode? A side effect of her bipolar disorder? Bipolar mania can manifest as paranoia, erratic behavior, and confrontational actions. Had she stopped taking her medication, or was she taking it incorrectly? The hotel staff noted that while she was moved because of the complaints, Lisa herself didn't seem overtly aggressive or threatening when they dealt with her. Just ... strange. Once in the solitude of her private room, Lisa's known movements become a scattered trail of digital breadcrumbs and fleeting real-world encounters. She remained active on her Tumblr blog, posting images and reblogging content from other users. Her posts during this time seemed to reflect a mind in flux, swinging between light and shadow. Some posts were lighthearted, related to fashion or art, but some were profoundly dark and melancholic. One post was a picture of a fashion model lying on the ground in a way that made her look deceased. Another was a quote from her favorite author, Chuck Palahniuk, "You're always haunted by the idea you're wasting your life." Her digital footprint mirrored the very nature of her illness, a chaotic and unpredictable swing between moods and thoughts. She was scheduled to check out of the Cecil Hotel on January 31st. Her plan was to travel from Los Angeles to Santa Cruz, the next stop on her West Coast tour. Her family back in Burnaby, with whom she spoke every single day without fail, expected to hear from her. They were her lifeline, her support system. They knew of her struggles and maintained this daily contact to ensure she was safe in managing her condition. But on January 31st, the call to her parents never came. The day passed. Then the evening. Silence. Elisa Lam also missed her scheduled checkout at the hotel. She was gone. Her parents, David and Yina Lam, immediately knew something was terribly wrong. It was completely and utterly out of character for Elisa to break their daily ritual of communication. Panic set in. They called the hotel, desperate for information. They called the Los Angeles Police Department and officially reported their daughter as a missing person. The LAPD responded quickly. Officers were dispatched to the Cecil Hotel, and a search of the building began. They went directly to her room, 1414. Inside, they found all of her belongings. Her wallet, her identification cards, her cell phone, the clothes she had packed for her trip, the books and music she had recently purchased as gifts for her family. Everything was there, neatly arranged. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of foul play, no suicide note. It was as if she had simply stood up and walked out of the room, leaving everything behind, and vanished into thin air. The police expanded their search. They, along with a canine unit, swept the hotel from top to bottom. They searched the public areas. The opulent, faded lobby, the long, dim hallways, the various lounges and back rooms. They went to the roof. The rooftop itself was a complex area, divided into 4 separate sections. Access was supposed to be strictly controlled. 3 of the access doors were locked, and their alarms were fully functional. A 4th door, which led to a fire escape, was also locked. Only hotel staff possessed the keys to these doors. The officers who went to the roof during those initial searches in early February reported that the heavy metal hatches to the 4 large water tanks were closed. They saw nothing amiss. The search dog, trained to find a human scent, reportedly tracked Elisa's scent to a window on the 14th floor that led to the fire escape and then lost the trail. The trail went cold inside the hotel. For days, the search continued with no results. The mystery deepened. Lisa's family, frantic with worry, flew from Vancouver to Los Angeles to aid in the search and to plead with the public for help. They plastered the streets of downtown Los Angeles with flyers, the smiling face of their missing daughter looking out from telephone poles and storefront windows. The story began to pick up traction with the local media. A young female tourist, traveling alone, missing from a hotel with a notoriously dark past. The narrative was compelling and deeply unsettling. One of the few solid leads the police had came from a business just a few blocks from the Cecil Hotel. The Last Bookstore, a sprawling labyrinthine temple to the written word, was one of the last places Elisa was seen by an independent witness. The owner, Katie Orphan, remembered her clearly. She recalled Eliza being in the store on January 30th, the day before she officially disappeared. According to Orphan, Eliza was buying books and music to take home as gifts for her family in Canada. She was lively, friendly, and very outgoing, not seeming at all distressed or afraid. She happily chatted about her trip and her plans. But then, as her time in the store wore on, Orphan noticed a subtle but definite shift in her behavior. Lisa became more anxious, almost hyperactive. She grew worried about the weight of the books she was buying, concerned that they would be too heavy for her luggage. It was a subtle change, from carefree tourist to a person wrestling with an internal anxiety. Still, she eventually left the store in what seemed to be good spirits, carrying a bag of gifts for her family. It was the last confirmed, independent sighting of her alive and well. The days turned into a week, then 2 weeks. For her family, it was an eternity of agonizing silence. The police were running out of leads. The hotel's sinister history loomed over the entire investigation, with whispers of ghosts and curses mixing with the stark, terrifying reality of a missing person case. The pressure to find answers, to find any clue at all, was immense. And so, on February 13th, nearly 2 weeks after Elisa Lam was last seen, the Los Angeles Police Department made a decision that would turn this strange and tragic case into a global phenomenon. They decided to release to the public the last known footage of her, silent, grainy video, captured by a security camera. A video that would become one of the most disturbing, debated, and analyzed pieces of footage in the history of the internet. They released the elevator video. The video is just under 4 minutes long, quality is poor, the image is washed out, and the timestamp at the bottom is obscured. A detail that would later fuel endless debate. The location is one of the Cecil Hotel's elevators. The camera is mounted in one of the upper corners, providing a wide static shot of the interior. When the footage begins, the elevator doors slide open, and a young woman, Elisa Lam, dressed in a red, unzipped hoodie over a gray t-shirt with black shorts and sandals, steps into the elevator from the right. Her movements are casual, normal. She walks directly to the control panel and presses a series of buttons. Then she steps back into the corner of the elevator, near the wall, and waits. And this is where normalcy ends, and the high strangeness begins. The elevator doors don't close. She waits. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5. Nothing happens. The doors remain wide open, revealing a slice of the dimly lit hotel hallway. Lisa cautiously takes a step forward and peers out into the corridor. She looks to her right, then quickly snaps her head to the left, a sharp, bird-like movement. It's as if she's checking to see if someone is there, someone she might be expecting or someone she might be hiding from. Her movements are furtive, anxious, like a prey animal sensing a nearby predator. Seeing nothing, she quickly retreats back into the elevator, pressing herself into the corner as if trying to make herself invisible. Still, the doors refuse to close. It's as if the machine is broken or being held. A few seconds later, she moves again. She steps back to the control panel and begins to press more buttons. Perhaps she's trying to reset the elevator to force the doors to shut. She presses a whole column of them, methodically one after another. Then she steps back again. The elevator remains stubbornly, unnervingly still. It is refusing to give her sanctuary, refusing to take her away. Then her behavior becomes even more bizarre. She steps out of the elevator and into the hallway. She shuffles from side to side, looking down the corridor first to her left, then to her right. She steps back towards the elevator, then out again. It's a strange, hesitant dance with an unseen partner. She seems to be playing a game of hide and seek, but no one else is visible. And then comes the most chilling and inexplicable part of the entire video. Standing in the hallway, just outside the open elevator doors, Elisa Lam begins to gesture with her hands. Her fingers are splayed, her arms moving in a fluid, undulating, almost unnatural way. She seems to be talking to someone, or something, that is just out of the camera's view. Her head nods. Her body sways slightly. Her hands twist and turn in the air as if she is describing something, or pleading with someone. Who is she talking to? Is it a person standing just down that hallway? Is she in the middle of a profound hallucination, her mind projecting a person who isn't there? Is this a symptom of a full-blown psychotic break brought on by her bipolar disorder? Or is there someone real, someone dangerous, standing just out of frame? Who is the key to this entire mystery? She contorts her hands, twisting them together near her waist, then brings them up towards her head, running her fingers through her hair. For over 30 seconds she stands there, engaged in this silent, ghostly pantomime. Then, just as suddenly as it began, she stops. She turns, walks away down the hallway to the left, and disappears from the camera's view completely. For the first time since she entered it, Elisa is no longer in or near the elevator. And then, the impossible seems to happen. After she is gone, after all her frantic button pushing failed to produce any result, the elevator doors slide shut. As if released from some invisible hold, they open again, then shut, then open again. The elevator seems to be cycling through floors, working perfectly now that she is no longer there. The video continues for another minute, showing only the empty interior of the elevator. A silent, metallic box, before it finally ends. This footage was the last time anyone ever saw Elisa Lam alive. When the LAPD released the video to the public, they hoped it would generate tips that someone might recognize her or have information about her whereabouts. They had no idea they were about to unleash a firestorm of speculation and obsession that would captivate millions of people around the world. The video went viral almost instantly, was uploaded to YouTube, where it has been viewed tens of millions of times. It was shared on Reddit, on Facebook, on Twitter. It was dissected on countless true crime forums and paranormal blogs. It was like a piece of found footage horror, a real-life ring tape, but it was horrifyingly real. It was terrifying. Amateur sleuths from every corner of the globe became obsessed with the case. They became known as web sleuths, and they dedicated countless hours to solving the puzzle of Elisa Lam. They slowed the video down frame by frame. They brightened the image, trying to find hidden clues in the grainy footage. They analyzed her body language, her gestures, her every move. Theories exploded across the internet, ranging from the plausible and tragic to the conspiratorial and the paranormal. One major school of thought focused on her documented mental health struggles. Was this simply a tragic case of a young woman in the throes of a severe manic or psychotic episode? Bipolar disorder can, in some cases, cause intense paranoia, delusions, and hallucinations. Her strange behavior in the elevator, the hiding, the furtive peeking, the talking and gesturing to someone who wasn't there, could all be explained as symptoms of her illness. According to this theory, in her disoriented and paranoid state, led the elevator and sought a hiding place, somehow finding her way to the roof and, tragically and accidentally, into the water tank. But many others weren't so sure. They pointed to inconsistencies and strange details in the video. If she was having a psychotic episode, where was the person or persons who might have taken advantage of her extremely vulnerable state? The Cecil Hotel, after all, was not a safe place. Skid Row was right outside its doors, Had she encountered someone dangerous in the hallway? Was she hiding from them in the elevator? Some viewers claimed they could see the faint reflection of another person in the elevator. Mirrored walls for a split second. Others, with a more technical eye, pointed out that the timestamp was obscured and that a portion of the video, nearly a full minute, appears to be missing or has been intentionally edited out. They also noted that the video seems to be slowed down at certain points. Was this evidence of a cover-up either by the hotel or by law enforcement? And the biggest question of all, why didn't the elevator doors close when she was inside pushing the buttons, but functioned perfectly the moment she left? Was someone physically holding the door open button from outside the elevator? Just out of the camera's view, then there were the darker, more outlandish, and more conspiratorial theories. Fueled by the hotel's sinister history and a series of bizarre coincidences, web sleuths discovered something strange. Shortly after Elisa's disappearance, a new and particularly persistent strain of tuberculosis broke out on Skid Row, very near the Cecil Hotel. In an almost unbelievable twist, the name of the standard diagnostic test kit used to detect this particular strain of tuberculosis was the Elisa test. That is, the Elisa test. Too many, this was too much of a coincidence to ignore. They spun elaborate theories involving secret biological warfare experiments and government conspiracies. With Elisa cast as some kind of test subject or a whistleblower who knew too much and had to be silenced. And of course, there were the paranormal theories. This was the Cecil Hotel, after all, a place of countless suicides, unsolved murders, and a home to serial killers. Was Elisa Lam interacting with one of the hotel's many alleged ghosts? Is the elevator malfunctioning due to some supernatural force? Is she being tormented by an entity that only she could see? To those who believe in such things, the video was clear and chilling evidence of a genuine haunting. Elisa Lam, they argued, was not the victim of a person, or even of her own illness. She was a victim of the place itself. The palpable evil that had soaked into the walls of the Cecil for nearly a century had finally reached out and claimed another soul. The elevator video raised far more questions than it answered. It was a 4-minute glimpse into a mystery that seemed to grow deeper, darker, and more complex with every viewing. It turned Elisa Lam from a missing person into a modern-day ghost story, a digital enigma for the 21st century. The world was watching, captivated and horrified in equal measure. And all the while, for the 6 days between the video's release and the gruesome discovery, millions of people dissected this ghostly footage. Elisa's body was floating just a few floors above where the video was filmed, decomposing in the stagnant, murky water of the hotel's cistern. The solution to the guests' complaints about the water pressure, the answer to the foul taste, and the putrid smell, was also the answer to the question of where she had gone. But the biggest question of all remained unanswered. Hanging in the air like the foul stench that had finally led Santiago Lopez to the roof. How did she get there? The discovery of Elisa Lam's body on February 19th shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a homicide investigation. The primary question for the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office was the cause of death. Was it murder or something else? Getting her body out of the tank proved to be a grim and difficult task. The opening at the top of the cistern was too small to accommodate the equipment needed to lift a body, especially one that had been submerged in water for 19 days. Firefighters were forced to cut a hole in the side of the massive steel tank, draining the dark water and finally extricating her remains. An autopsy was performed, but the results were delayed. The condition of the body, having been submerged for so long, made the process difficult. The world waited, the internet buzzing with anticipation and speculation. The two prevailing theories, foul play versus a tragic accident, were about to be put to the test. If she was murdered, there would be signs of trauma, evidence of a struggle. If it was an accident or suicide, the evidence would point in a different direction. While the coroner worked, investigators focused on the logistical nightmare of the rooftop. How could Elisa, alone and in a possibly disoriented state, have gotten to the roof, climbed the 10-foot-tall water tank, opened the heavy lid, and gotten inside? The police maintained that the rooftop was secured. 4 doors led to the roof. 3 were locked, and alarms on them were functional. A 4th, leading to a fire escape, was also locked. If Elisa had gone through any of these doors, an alarm should have sounded, and hotel staff would have been alerted. No alarms were triggered on or around the day she disappeared. This left the fire escape as the only other plausible route. But it was a daunting one. She would have had to climb up the fire escape from a lower floor window, a perilous and physically demanding feat. Once on the roof, she would have had to navigate in the dark to the platform where the water tank stood. Then, she would have had to climb a ladder attached to the side of the 10-foot tank. But even that ladder didn't go all the way to the top. It stopped a few feet short, requiring anyone wanting to reach the platform to pull themselves up and over the edge. It was a move that required a not insignificant amount of upper body strength and coordination. And then there was the lid. The hatch to the water tank was a heavy, circular piece of metal, weighing approximately 20 pounds. Could Elisa, a woman of slight build, have lifted that heavy lid by herself? It seemed unlikely. But even if she could, an even more perplexing question remained. Santiago Lopez, the maintenance worker who found her, was certain of one thing. The hatch was closed when he found it. Closed, not ajar. If Elisa had gotten into the tank herself, how could she possibly have closed the heavy lid from the inside? This single detail, the closed hatch, became the cornerstone for those who believed she was murdered. For them, the conclusion was obvious. Someone else had been on that roof with her. Someone who had killed her, or forced her into the tank, and then sealed her in, leaving her to drown in the darkness. The discovery of her body in such an impossible location didn't solve the mystery. It amplified it into a scream. The news that a body had been found in the Cecil Hotel's water supply detonated a bomb of public revulsion and media frenzy. The hotel, already infamous, became a global symbol of urban horror. Guests who had been staying there were besieged by reporters as they fled the building. Their faces, a mixture of disgust and disbelief. One British couple, Michael and Sabina Baugh, had been staying at the Cecil for 8 days. The water had a funny, sweet, disgusting taste, Michael told reporters. It's a very strange taste. I can barely describe it, Sabina added. The shower was awful. You turned the tap on. The water was coming out black first, for 2 seconds, and then it was going back to normal. They, like hundreds of others, had been living in a real-life horror film. The Los Angeles County Department of Public Health issued a do-not-drink order for the hotel and began immediate testing of the water. Miraculously, tests for fecal and other dangerous coliform bacteria came back negative. The massive amount of water in the tank, combined with the chlorine used to treat it, had likely diluted the contamination to a level that was not pathogenic. But the psychological damage was done. The thought of it was enough. The Cecil Hotel was now, and perhaps forever, the place where guests drank water in which a woman's body had been decomposing. The media encampment outside the hotel swelled into a small city of satellite trucks and reporters, all broadcasting the grotesque story to a captivated world. The elevator video, already a viral sensation, was now replayed endlessly, this time with a horrifying new context. The ghost-like figure in the video was no longer just a missing person. She was the dead woman in the water tank. Her strange gestures, her palpable fear, seemed to take on a new, more sinister meaning. Was she hiding from her killer? Was the person she appeared to be talking to in the hallway the one who had followed her to the roof? The global community of web sleuths went into overdrive. The discovery of the body was not an end to their investigation, but a dramatic new beginning. They had a cause of death, a location, and a timeline. Now they could refine their theories. The foul play camp felt utterly vindicated. The locked roof access, the difficult climb, the heavy hatch, it was, in their view, a mountain of circumstantial evidence pointing to murder. She was murdered and dumped in the tank. Was the rallying cry on forums across the internet? There is no other way. They analyzed the hotel's layout, creating diagrams of the roof and fire escape. They looked for potential suspects. Some even began to theorize about a hotel employee being involved, someone with keys to the roof. Someone who knew the building's blind spots. The tragic accident camp, however, pushed back. They focused on Elisa's documented battle with bipolar disorder. They argued that a severe manic episode, possibly accompanied by psychosis, could explain almost everything. Such an episode could endow a person with unusual strength and a frantic, single-minded determination. Perhaps in her delusional state, she believed something was chasing her, something terrifying. This would explain her behavior in the elevator. This imagined terror could have driven her to perform the incredible physical feat of climbing the fire escape and the water tank, seeking a hiding place. They argued that in her altered state of reality, the water tank might have seemed like the only safe refuge. And the paranormal theories, always simmering in the background due to the Cecil's history, exploded. For them, the physical impossibility of the situation was the entire point. It wasn't meant to make logical sense. Human killer would have been caught on camera. An accident seemed physically demanding. Therefore, the culprit had to be supernatural. The hotel itself, the entity that had claimed so many others, had claimed Elisa. They pointed out that she was found on the 19th and her room was on the 14th floor. Some traditions of numerology found significance in this. The elevator, they claimed, wasn't malfunctioning. It was being controlled by a spirit refusing to let her escape. Her strange hand gestures were not a conversation with a person, but an attempt to ward off an evil she could see and we could not. She hadn't climbed to the roof to hide from a person. She had been led there or chased there by a ghost. For 4 long months, the speculation raged. The world waited for the one document that could cut through the noise. The one piece of evidence that could provide a definitive answer. The official autopsy and toxicology report from the Los Angeles County coroner. The pressure on the coroner's office was immense. This wasn't just another case file. It was the key to a global obsession. In June of 2013, the report was finally released, and its conclusions were a bombshell. The report was stark, clinical, and for many, deeply unsatisfying. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, not homicide, not suicide. Accident. Under the section for other significant conditions, the report listed a single crucial factor: bipolar disorder. The coroner was officially and directly linking her mental state to the chain of events that led to her death. Then came the toxicology report, the part that so many had been waiting for. It detailed exactly what was in her system at the time of her death. Traces of her prescribed medications were found: an antidepressant, a mood stabilizer, and another medication used to treat side effects. A small amount of ibuprofen, a common pain reliever, was also present. But critically, the report detailed what was not in her system. There were no illegal drugs of any kind. No cocaine, no heroin, no psychedelics like LSD or PCP, and there was no alcohol. This finding decisively refuted the theories that she had been under the influence of some powerful hallucinogen that could have caused her bizarre behavior. Finally, the physical examination. The report stated that a comprehensive check of her body found no signs of physical trauma. There were no bruises, no cuts, no defensive wounds that would indicate a struggle. There was no evidence of sexual assault. This finding was a massive, almost insurmountable blow to the foul play theories. If she had been attacked, subdued, and forced into that tank, it was almost certain that some physical evidence of that struggle would have remained on her body, even after weeks in the water. There was none. The official story, as pieced together by the coroner and investigators, was one of profound and solitary tragedy. It was a story not of a monster, but of an illness. The narrative begins with Elisa's mental state. According to her family, she had been prescribed for different medications for her bipolar disorder. The autopsy revealed traces of some, but not all of them. And the levels of the drugs present suggested she had been under-medicating or had possibly stopped taking some of them altogether. This could have easily triggered a severe manic or psychotic episode. The elevator video, according to this official theory, was not a recording of a woman hiding from a killer. It was a devastatingly public recording of a young woman losing her grip on reality. Her frantic button pushing, her hiding in the corner, her furtive glances into the hallways, these were symptoms of intense paranoia. Her strange hand gestures and apparent conversation were not with a person, but with a hallucination, a phantom conjured by her own distressed mind. In this state of psychosis, investigators theorized, she fled the elevator. Seeking escape from the terrors in her own head, she somehow made her way to a window that accessed the fire escape. Driven by a primal fear, she climbed. She navigated the rickety iron stairs, ascending floor after floor in the darkness until she reached the roof. Once there, surrounded by the dizzying lights of the city, her delusion would have continued. She saw the water tanks. What did she think in that moment? We can never know. Was she trying to hide? Was she experiencing an overwhelming thirst, a known side effect of some of her medications? Or was she having a spiritual or delusional experience? Believing the water offered some form of cleansing or escape, according to this theory, she climbed a ladder bolted to the side of the 10-foot tank. She pulled herself up the final few feet onto the platform. Fueled by adrenaline and a reality detached from our own, she found the strength to lift the 20-pound lid. And then she got inside. The final moments of her life, according to this narrative, are almost too horrific to contemplate. She would have entered the water, expecting something, safety perhaps, but she would have found only cold, darkness, and confinement. The water level inside the tank was high enough that she couldn't stand, but low enough that she couldn't reach the top to push the heavy lid open again. The inside walls of the tank were smooth, coated with an epoxy that offered no handholds. She would have been trapped, treading water in the pitch black, screaming for help that would never come, until exhaustion finally claimed her and she slipped beneath the surface for the last time. But what about the closed hatch? This remained the single most difficult fact to reconcile with the accident theory. How could she have closed it from the inside? Investigators offered a few possibilities. Perhaps the lid was not as heavy as reported, or its hinge mechanism allowed it to swing shut on its own once opened past a certain point. Or perhaps, in her final moments of agency, she pulled it closed herself, either accidentally or as part of her delusion, sealing her own fate. This explanation, for many, felt weak. It was a loose thread in an otherwise tightly woven, if tragic, official story. The coroner's report was meant to be the final word, but for the vast community of people captivated by the case, it was just another chapter. The skeptics and the sleuths were not convinced. They clung to the unanswered questions, the details that didn't quite fit the neat box of accidental death. The elevator video remained a source of intense debate. The LAPD eventually admitted that the footage had been altered before its public release. They claimed that nearly a minute of footage was cut out and the video was slowed down, simply to reduce the file size for emailing and uploading. They insisted nothing of evidentiary value was removed. But for the conspiracy-minded, this was a smoking gun. What was in that missing minute? Did it show a second person? Did it show Eliza being pursued? The police explanation seemed too mundane, too simple for a case this strange. Why alter the speed? Why not just release the whole thing? The lack of transparency fueled a deep and lasting distrust. And what of the Elisa tuberculosis test? For investigators, this was a textbook example of coincidence and confirmation bias. The test had existed long before the case and was named for its scientific properties. Liporabineminin enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. The connection to Elisa Lam's name was purely, bizarrely coincidental. For a rational mind, it was a curious footnote. But for those convinced of a deeper plot, it remained a tantalizing clue, a sign that powerful forces were at work. A bizarre piece of evidence that the official narrative was a cover-up for something far more sinister. The case was officially closed, but the mystery endured, taking on a life of its own in popular culture. It became the subject of documentaries, podcasts, television shows, and endless YouTube videos. The Cecil Hotel, which had already inspired a season of the television series American Horror Story, was now cemented in the public consciousness as a place of profound darkness. The story of Elisa Lam became a modern folktale, a cautionary story about mental illness, urban decay, and the chilling power of an unsolved mystery in the internet age. The case was officially closed, but the story of Elisa Lam was just beginning its true life, not in the cold, sterile files of the Los Angeles County coroner, but in the sprawling, chaotic, and often brilliant mind of the internet. The coroner's report, with its conclusion of accidental drowning, was supposed to be a period at the end of a tragic sentence. Instead, it became a catalyst. A declaration of war for a global army of digital detectives who refused to accept the official narrative. For them, the story wasn't over. They were just getting started. The elevator video was their sacred text, and the Cecil Hotel was their crime scene. From bedrooms and home offices across the world, thousands of people who had never met Elisa Lam dedicated themselves to finding the justice they believed she had been denied. This was the dawn of a new era of crime solving, the age of the web sleuth. And the Elisa Lam case was its genesis, its most compelling and cautionary tale. They congregated in the digital town squares of the 21st century, on Reddit forums like Unresolved Mysteries, in sprawling comment threads on YouTube, and in dedicated Facebook groups. They were a diverse coalition of the curious and the concerned. There were retired police officers, data analysts, graphic designers, stay-at-home parents, and students. They brought with them a collective skill set that no single police department could ever hope to match. They had infinite time, boundless passion, and a powerful crowdsourced intelligence. They took the evidence that had been made public and subjected it to a level of scrutiny that was both astonishing and, at times, terrifying. The elevator video was dissected with a forensic intensity that bordered on obsession. Graphic designers and video editors enhanced the footage, stabilizing the shaky image, brightening the murky corners. They were looking for the single frame, the one pixel clue that the professionals might have missed. They found anomalies. They found plenty of them. The theory that the video had been tampered with became an article of faith. It wasn't just the missing minute of footage that the LAPD had casually admitted to cutting. Sleuths pointed to the timestamp at the bottom of the screen. It was blurred, almost completely obscured. Why was it to hide the true time of the events, or to conceal an edit, a jump cut, where something crucial had been removed? They noted that the elevator door seems to blur and distort for a single frame as Elisa steps out. A telltale sign, they claimed, of digital manipulation. Then there was the speed. The LAPD's explanation that the footage was slowed down to reduce file size struck the community as laughably thin. Sleuths performed their own analysis, suggesting that if the video were played at its normal speed, Elisa's movements would appear more natural, less bizarre. But even more sinister was the suggestion that it wasn't slowed down uniformly. Perhaps certain parts were slowed to obscure the movements of a second person, while other parts were left untouched. The hunt for a second person became a digital crusade. Pixel hunters stared into the dark, reflective surfaces of the elevator doors and walls for hours on end. Some claimed to see a fleeting reflection of another figure. Others thought they could make out the shape of a shoe or the leg of a pair of trousers. Stepping away from the door, just as Elisa exited the elevator for the final time, these were fleeting, ghostly images, the kind of shapes one might see in clouds, but for a believer, they were proof. Proof of a presence. Proof of a phantom attacker. The audio, or lack thereof, was another battleground. The video was released without sound. The LAPD stated this was how it was recorded. But was that true? In a hotel of the Cecil's age, could it have had an older system that did record audio? Was the soundtrack deliberately removed because it contained Elisa's voice, or the voice of her killer? The silence in the video was deafening, and it left a vacuum that was filled with terrifying possibilities. This intense, crowdsourced investigation, however, had a dark side. In their zeal to find a culprit, the web sleuths sometimes devolved into a digital mob. Their most notorious misstep came when they targeted a Mexican musician who went by the stage name Morbid. Shortly after Elisa's death, this death metal artist had posted a video online. In it, he was in a dark, hotel-like setting, and the lyrics to his song were about a girl dying in water. It was a chilling coincidence, too chilling for the internet. Within days, Morbid was declared a suspect. His real name and personal information were uncovered and spread across the web. He was bombarded with death threats, accused of murder, and his life was turned into a living hell. The fact that he had a solid alibi he had been in Mexico, recording his album at the time of Elisa's disappearance, mattered little to the online mob. He was their man, fit the profile of the monster they were looking for. The incident served as a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked speculation, of how a search for justice can curdle into persecution. Morbid was an innocent man, a creative artist whose dark aesthetic had accidentally collided with a real-life nightmare, and he paid a heavy price. While the sleuths hunted for killers in the digital ether, another group of theorists looked for answers not in pixels, but in patterns. They looked to the dark, blood-soaked history of the Cecil Hotel itself. For them, Elisa Lam was not just a random victim. She was the latest sacrifice to a building that seemed to demand them, The Cecil was not merely a backdrop for the tragedy. It was an active participant. They saw the hotel as a nexus, a weak spot in the fabric of reality where darkness congregates. A place with such a high concentration of suicide, murder, and misery, they argued, develops a kind of psychic stain, a malevolent memory that replays itself, that echoes down the decades. They pointed to the sheer number of people who had leaped from the hotel's windows. Was Eliza in her own way another jumper? Had she been psychically pushed by the same despair that had claimed so many others? The parallels between Elisa Lam and Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, were drawn with chilling precision. Both were young, beautiful women who had come to Los Angeles with dreams. Both were last seen in or around the Cecil Hotel. Both met a mysterious and horrific end that became a national obsession.
Oh.
Both of their cases remain in the public mind, deeply unresolved. Was Elisa's death an echo of the Dahlias? Was there a single dark energy that had claimed them both decades apart? Then there was the almost unbelievable cinematic parallel. In 2005, a Japanese horror film called Dark Water was remade in the United States. The plot of the film is terrifyingly familiar. A mother and daughter move into a rundown apartment building. They are plagued by strange occurrences and dirty, dark water coming from their taps. The story culminates with the discovery of the body of a young girl who had gone missing from the building a year earlier, decomposing in the rooftop water tank. When web sleuths discovered this film, it sent a shockwave through the community. The parallels were so specific, so precise, that coincidence seemed impossible. Elisa Lam was a known film lover. Had she seen Dark Water? Was it possible that, in the throes of a psychotic episode, she had unconsciously reenacted the plot of a horror film? This theory offered a bizarre bridge between the worlds of mental illness and paranormal influence. Perhaps her fragile mind, already primed by her interest in the macabre, latched onto this fictional narrative and played it out to its tragic conclusion. Or, for the more conspiratorially minded, was her death a ritualistic copycat murder? A killing deliberately staged to mirror the film? Carried out by a killer with a flair for the theatrical? The paranormal theories went even deeper. Former guests and employees of the Cecil began to come forward with their own stories. Tales of disembodied voices in the hallways, of the sensation of being choked or held down in their beds at night. One story told of a guest who took a photo in his room, and upon developing it, saw the spectral figure of a woman hanging from his ceiling. These were just stories, urban legends perhaps, but when added to the weight of the Cecil's known history, they created a powerful narrative. The narrative of a haunted place. These theorists believed Elisa's encounter was not with a person, but with one of these entities. They analyzed the elevator video as evidence of a classic haunting. The malfunctioning elevator is a common paranormal trope. Her strange gestures were not to a hallucination, but to a spirit only she could see. Some even claimed her hand gestures resembled the elevator ritual, a supposed Korean urban legend and online game where pressing buttons in a specific sequence is said to transport the player to another dimension. Could Eliza, a savvy internet user, have been attempting this ritual, either playfully or in a state of delusion? It was a far-fetched theory, but in a case with no easy answers, no theory was off the table. Against this tidal wave of paranormal speculation and amateur investigation, the official story stood on what seemed like increasingly shaky ground. An accidental death theory, while plausible on the surface, began to fray when subjected to a relentless critical analysis. Every key piece of evidence that supported the official narrative had a powerful counterargument. Let's begin with the access to the roof. The LAPD and hotel management insisted the roof was secured. The doors were locked and alarmed. But was that truly the case? Several former guests of the Cecil came forward after the case became famous, claiming that accessing the roof was, in fact, remarkably easy. They spoke of at least one of the alarmed doors being frequently propped open, or of alarms that were old and didn't function correctly. They described going up to the roof to smoke or to take in the view without any trouble at all. If this was true, then Eliza wouldn't have needed to perform a death-defying climb up the fire escape. She could have simply walked through an unlocked door. This dramatically lowered the barrier of physical improbability. But it also opened up a terrifying possibility. If it was easy for her to get to the roof, it was just as easy for someone else to follow her up there. Then there is the central, insurmountable problem: the water tank lid. The official report never adequately explained how Elisa Lam could have closed that 20-pound lid from inside the tank. The theory that it swung shut on its own was tested by journalists and investigators who visited the site. They found the lid to be heavy, cumbersome, and without any kind of spring-loaded hinge. Stayed where you put it. The idea that she could have pulled it closed from inside the dark water-filled tank while treading water is almost physically impossible. This single fact remains the bedrock of the foul play theory. It is the stubborn detail that refuses to fit into the neat narrative of an accident. For many, there is only one explanation for the closed lid. Someone else closed it. Someone who was standing on top of the tank after she was inside. Now, let's re-examine the autopsy report. No signs of trauma. This was the cornerstone of the coroner's conclusion. But how definitive is that really? The body had been decomposing in water for 19 days. This process, known as putrefaction, can obscure or even destroy evidence of things like bruising or ligature marks. Furthermore, a killer wouldn't necessarily need to leave physical marks. A person could be coerced at knife point or gunpoint. They could be verbally threatened into climbing that ladder and getting into the tank. Such a murder by threat and intimidation, would leave no physical trace on the body. It would look, for all the world, like an accident or a suicide. And what of sexual assault? While the report found no evidence, the advanced state of decomposition would make finding such evidence extremely difficult. The lack of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. The toxicology report also came under scrutiny. It showed she was under-medicating. This supports the theory of a manic episode, but her family has always contested this. They insisted she was diligent with her medication. Could the stress of her solo trip have triggered an episode so severe that her prescribed dosage was no longer effective? Yes, but it's also possible that she was lucid. It is a common and dangerous misconception that people with bipolar disorder are perpetually unreliable or irrational. She could have been perfectly lucid when she encountered someone dangerous in the hotel, stigmatizing her as an unreliable narrator. Simply because of her diagnosis is a disservice to her memory and a potential obstacle to the truth. The official narrative asks us to believe in a chain of improbable events. It requires a young woman, in the midst of a psychotic episode, to navigate to the roof, perform a difficult physical climb, lift a heavy lid, get into a tank of water, and then somehow close the lid from the inside. The foul play theory asks us to believe in something far simpler, that a person, in a hotel known for attracting predators, was preyed upon. That she was followed, cornered on the roof, and forced into that tank by a person who then closed the lid and walked away, vanishing into the night. When laid out side by side, the accident theory in many ways requires a greater leap of faith than the murder theory. And so we are left adrift in a sea of uncertainty, caught between a plausible but flawed official story and a host of compelling but unproven alternative theories. The case of Elisa Lam has transcended the boundaries of true crime. It has become a modern myth, a story that touches upon our deepest fears: the fear of the unknown, the fear of madness, the fear of the dark places in our cities and in our minds, the fear of vanishing without a trace. The true tragedy of Elisa Lam is not just her death, but the way her story has been consumed. She has been reduced to a puzzle, a ghost, a character in a horror story. But she was so much more than that. To truly understand the loss, you have to go back to her own words, to the blog where she laid her soul bare. She wrote about her favorite books, her dreams of seeing the world. She posted a picture of a library with the caption, "This is where I belong." She wrote about her struggle with depression with a painful honesty. "I'm tired of being afraid of my own thoughts." And in one of her final posts, a quote from the novel Fight Club, she wrote, "I'm not the same. Having seen the moonshine on the other side of the world." She came to Los Angeles searching for that transformation, to see the moon from a different shore, to become someone new. She was a young woman fighting a war inside her own head, but she was fighting it with courage, with humor, and with a desperate, beautiful hope for the future. That hope died with her in the cold, dark water of the Cecil Hotel. Her death left a void that has been filled with speculation and shadows. The unresolved nature of her case is what makes it so haunting. It denies us the comfort of closure. It forces us to live with the questions. Was she a victim of her own troubled mind? A tragic illustration of the failures of our mental health system? Was she the victim of a cunning and sadistic killer who has never been caught? A ghost who still walks the streets of Los Angeles? Or was she a victim of a place, a building so saturated with human misery that it has become a vortex of tragedy? We may never know the truth. The answers are likely locked away forever in the silent final moments of her life on that lonely rooftop. What we are left with is an echo, the echo of a hotel door closing, the echo of water dripping in the dark, the echo of a young woman's voice, preserved forever in the digital world, still speaking of her dreams. The mystery of Elisa Lam is not a riddle to be solved. It is a tragedy to be remembered. It is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones we can see, but the ones that hide in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the frame, waiting in the silence.